Well, I appreciate everybody coming. This gets more and more flattering. So hopefully I won't have to experience it again because maybe somebody else will pick it up. But I guess I will if I haven't. So I'm going to talk about this subject, which is sort of a combination of some of the things that I love the most besides radiology and my girlfriend. So that we all know where we are, there's Africa down here at the bottom, and Europe and Asia. And so I'm going to be talking about exclusively this geography in a time that I call Antiquity, not just me, everybody. A lot of people call it Antiquity. That may not be a really familiar word. Most people say ancient history. I don't like that term just because I think that it seems like it was a long time ago, and maybe so long ago that it doesn't even matter. It seems like this era is, I don't know, not appreciated as much as I think it should be. And I wonder whether some of it has to do with teaching ancient history that is ancient and all the connotations that go along with that. I like Antiquity. That period for me means about 550 BC, which is when really history started to be, well, the time about which history started to be written at the very beginning. And it goes, in my mind, to 476 AD, which is one of the dates you can use for the fall of the Roman Empire. Classical civilization is another term that people use, and that classical Greece is a different time than classical Rome, so that I just sort of throw that out because it doesn't necessarily mean anything specific. And by the way, I could talk a lot, and it'd probably be a lot more boring if I just do that. If anybody has any questions along the way, especially if you didn't come to the last one. No, that's not what I did. The people who came to the last talk realized that it was very give and take, and that's what made it fun. So if you didn't come to that, feel free to just talk and ask questions, and we'll go back and forth. Because if this is just a lecture, then it won't be nearly as interesting, and nobody will learn quite as much.
Well, so, David.
Yes.
For those who were not here, you should point out again where Latvia is. It's your main
Latvia, let's see.
Well, maybe
Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So Latvia is right
farther north. Yep, that's good.
Around there.
Thank you.
Find Finland and go south.
Did anybody live there during the Antiquity?
There were people there, but we don't know anything about them.
Until Rita got here.
Yeah.
You were there in Antiquity?
Until Rita was born, Latvia didn't contribute much to civilization. So, okay. So the other thing that we're talking about, well, I'm going to talk about history from about 550 to about 168 BC because, well, those are, the first date is sort of arbitrary, the second date is very specific. But I'm going to be highlighting that history by talking about 5 battles. And battles are important because the people who win the battles decide how the world goes. And it seems to me that there are 5 battles in particular that were either turning points, great important turning points, or prevented huge turning points. So at least those 2 criteria have to be fulfilled. And most of these battles have some sort of military innovation or tactical genius that happened that usually let a force that was definitely the underdog take the day. So I chose 5. Another person would choose a couple different. There are a couple of giants that nobody could argue with probably. But we have a choice of 30, 40 battles through this 1,000 years of time that would probably be eligible and that we know enough about, and that were pivotal enough to talk about. I've had to choose 5, so I'll actually mention a couple others in passing, because you can't really talk about this period without talking about them, but I won't go into detail. Okay, so we're going to start in Persia. We're going to start in the Middle East. So where's my pointer? So we're going to be in here. So in 550, around 550, there was a Persian king named Cyrus. And we know that Cyrus from the Bible. He's the same Cyrus that they talk about in the Bible. He is from Persia, which is modern-day Iran, and they were a poor, out-of-the-way place, big in area, but not big in wealth, not influential. The people who were influential were the Babylonians, who were living down here in Iraq, and the Medes, who were living up here, and the Lydians, who were living over here in present-day Turkey, which I'll refer to as Asia Minor. Cyrus was sort of a military innovator. He was a genius, and he took these poor Persians and he built them into a huge empire. First, he allied with the Medes, and then in the Battle of Thymbra in 546 BC, he defeated the Lydian king, whose name was Croesus, and we know about Croesus because we have the phrase "richest Croesus." I didn't know that. Maybe that's an older phrase. But my mom had heard it before, so I don't know. Maybe some people have heard it. Croesus was supposedly the richest man in the world, and so we get that term "richest Croesus" from Herodotus, who is a historian who tells us a lot about this time period.
Are the Lydians in the territory where the Assyrians used to be?
Yes, the Lydians.
They disappeared by now?
Yeah, the Assyrians are gone. The Assyrians are gone a couple hundred years earlier.
Okay.
The Assyrians were Does Nineveh, which is about, let's see, does that say Nineveh there? The Assyrian capital is near Mosul, Iraq, northern Iraq. Okay, is that what it says? So the Assyrians were gone a couple hundred years before, and the Medes occupied that territory, but were dominated by the Lydians, who were more in the central and western part of Asia Minor. The Babylonians, still very powerful, are occupying Egypt and Iraq and, say, Jordan, a little bit of Syria. And this is still during the time of, if you remember your Sunday school, the Babylonian captivity of the Jews. Nebuchadnezzar sweeps into Israel, takes the Jews back. Cyrus, the one that I'm talking about, in 539, I'll actually talk about that date. Cyrus will free the Jews, so that's how we know about Cyrus. So Cyrus defeats Croesus, the Battle of Thymbra in 546, and then 7 years later, the Battle of Opis defeats the Babylonians. That's the end of the Babylonian captivity, and all the Jews get to go home. Go Brittany and Lance. Glad to have you with us.
Glad you're here to represent.
We're glad you're back.
Maccabees were 105.
Maccabees. No Maccabees. Sorry. So Cyrus dies after having built this huge empire, and his nephew Cambyses, a couple of decades later, marches into Egypt. He takes over Egypt, and by about 500 BC, the Persians now own everything from basically Afghanistan and Pakistan. Here's the Indus River over here. North into sort of Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan and those places. Cyrus actually died at a battle up here with the Massageti, which I won't be able to talk about, but it's a good battle. And so by 500, all of this yellow shaded area is Persian territory. Now included in this Persian territory is right on the western coast of Asia Minor are these cities in the area called Ionia. Those are important because all of that territory is inhabited by Greeks. Not only are they Greek-speaking, they're fully Greek people. They're as Greek as the people in Athens are. As a matter of fact, they are genetically related to the Athenians. They speak the same dialect of Greek. They consider themselves first cousins, basically, as opposed to people elsewhere in Greece who descended from a little bit farther back, even though they still speak Greek.
What area is that today, David?
It's just the western coast of Asia Minor. It's Turkey. It's
Part of Turkey.
It is actually those islands. The islands are Greek. They're modern day Greek, and the mainland cities are modern day Turkey. And they're places like Troy. There are places like Samos, Lemnos, Lesbos, all those islands over there. So the Persians sweep through and they take over the Greek cities. And these Greek cities are largely democratic, at least loosely democratic. But they're definitely city-states that are self-governed. And they don't want to have some guy living in Persepolis a couple thousand miles away telling them what to do. So in about 500, a little bit before and a little bit after, the Greek city-states rebelled against the Persian Empire. And that's denoted by all those fires. So all those cities are rebelling. And the Athenians, way over here, decide that they're going to help. Now, that's a little bitty city who's got a lot of chutzpah to take on the Persians. But these are their fellow countrymen, basically, so they're going to help. So the Athenians try to help, but they're absolutely overpowered. And the Persians put down all the rebellions and sell people into slavery and kill a bunch of people and do all the horrible things that we expect. And then the Persian king decides, well, we need to teach the Athenians a lesson. So he builds a fleet and an army. And in 494 BC, he decides to set out and invade Greece. So his land army marches from Turkey or Asia Minor over into Europe and starts going over, this is sort of Bulgaria, there's Macedonia there. And his fleet follows this line. You don't want to sail out into the middle of the Aegean Sea at this point, and for hundreds and hundreds of years. You like to hug the coast at least because the waters are calmer. So, and you have bases nearby to resupply and so forth. So he's hugging the coast, and he comes here, and here is Mount Athos, this peninsula here. And as the fleet rounds Mount Athos, a huge storm develops and sinks the entire fleet. Remnants of that fleet have been discovered in the last 2 years at the bottom right there off of Mount Athos, and they've gotten terracotta and some bronze and stuff. The ships were mostly wood except for some ramming beams and stuff, and they've recovered a couple of those. It's one of the biggest stories a couple of years ago in archaeology. And the land forces, well, they're left without a fleet, and so they sort of hustle back home because you've got no business being in enemy land that far away without having a fleet with you. So that's where we stand in 494. And yes, Lance, why? Why what?
Why do you need a fleet?
Because an army has to live off the land. And maintaining your supply line over enemy land is not easy now, and it was definitely not easy then, with no communications and so forth. A fleet, if you control the ocean, it's a lot faster to go across the Aegean than to march across the Aegean. To march across the land. So and so basically it's your supply line. And without that, you basically have to eat off the land, and once it becomes winter, you're done. Okay.
How many people were there in that?
I don't know. I don't know that Herodotus is really the only source who discusses that invasion anytime near when it happened. And he basically says what I said, is there was a fleet, it sunk, and the land forces went back. But, and I couldn't say specifically. I would guess, though, that it was on the order, judging from other battles, that other groups that the Persians raised, I would guess it was probably on the order of 30 to 60,000.
Was that when the Spartans defended the bridge?
Nope, that is 14 years later, which I'll mention in a second.
Yeah, that's probably unlikely. I would think for the first incursion, they actually completely underestimated the Greeks in terms of their power, so they probably just sent kind of an expeditionary force.
Well,
because I mean, the Greeks weren't really on their radar at all. You know, even after the Ionian revolt, I mean, they just thought of them as nobody, really. So I mean,
well, the reason I chose those numbers is because 4 years later, when they send a fleet across and no land forces across, basically they had all their land forces on ships which they sent across to Greece. And there were about 30,000 land forces at that time. And it seems to me that they might consider it more necessary to have larger numbers of men if they're traveling all that distance across land than if they just get to pop them into Greek territory de novo. But, like I said, nobody knows the numbers. I could be way off, and we'll never know. Unless we find a lot of skeletons in those ships. Okay. So
what year was that?
So the fleet sank in 494 BC. 4 years later, the Persians decide to send a fleet straight across and land in the Athenian home territory, sort of the county, if you will, called Attica.
What kind of drainage on the treasury would it be? I guess they had to build another navy?
Yeah. I don't think there had ever been, not counting China, about which I know nothing. I don't know of any other time in ancient history, including Rome, when an economy was so large and wealthy and centralized. You know, in Rome, there was a lot of capitalism sorts of things going on. And the emperor had a lot of money. But he didn't absolutely control everyone and everything. In Persia, the king controls the economy. So it would have been big, but it would not have been big enough to worry about. I would guess. I would say. So 4 years later, they're going to ship 30,000 men over to Attica, and they're going to go straight for Athens, basically. Now let's talk about Greek military. What I'm about to say is sort of fundamental when it comes to Greek military history. So the basic unit, the soldier, is called a hoplite. And hoplites are unique in the ancient world because they are incredibly heavily armed compared to their counterparts, compared to the people they're fighting against. A hoplite has about a 6 to 8 inch spear. He has a big shield which has a strap in the middle, and on the edge, sort of the right hand edge, a handle so that he can sort of hold it with his elbow in his hand. He has a short sword called a xiphos, as in xiphoid process. He has bronze greaves, which are the shin guards, and he has a breastplate also made of metal. And then he finally has a brass helmet, which protects his nose and his head, as you see. That helmet design happens to be called a Corinthian helmet, and it was used for hundreds of years, very successful design. So The Greek infantryman is really, really well armed, heavily armed, and well protected. On the left there, you see the formation that he fights in. He fights in a phalanx. Greeks weren't the only people to fight in phalanxes, is actually how you say it if you're talking about the military formation. There are relief carvings from Sumeria that show armies fighting in phalanx. Phalanx is just a bunch of guys in a block who basically charge up to somebody and attack in the formation sort of as a rectangle. Now, what is unique about the Greeks is they are very organized. Generally, they fought 8 ranks deep, and they sort of walked around in an open order as you see at the top there. It's not as dark. Can everybody see that?
Remember you do the work.
Sure. Show me the lights. No, right
Right
beside
here.
you.
Here,
Wall.
I think right
Yeah.
So, but when it comes to being in close rank and fighting formation, everybody closes up. Basically, you put your shield on the guy in front of you, and you push. And all your spears are headed forward, and there are about 2 or 3 ranks of spears that are headed straight out. So that makes it hard for you as the enemy to get through that sort of hedge of spears. The best Greek soldier, the honorary position, the best eunuchs, the best soldier was on the right. The reason is because if you're holding a shield on your left and you're holding a spear in your right hand, the shield basically covers half of your body and overlaps half of the guy to your left. That means your right is open. So you had to put your best unit on the right because they would both have to protect themselves from a frontal assault and make sure nobody got around to their exposed right that is unshielded. So, well, maybe you can't see, but you can imagine a bunch of people just lined up about 2.5, 3 feet apart, almost shoulder to shoulder with overlapping shields and spears coming out. That was the basic formation of the phalanx. Now warfare in Greece, Greeks care about individuals, which is part of the heritage that we get as Westerners, versus versus everybody being for the state or that sort of thing. We care about ourselves as individuals, and so do the Greeks. Which is part of the reason why they're so heavily armed, I think. The Greek hoplite soldier was a nobleman or in the middle class. They had an economy that had sort of middle class people, and each individual soldier equipped himself with everything that you see here, and it's sort of like people estimate a car. It's sort of like the expense that we would have of a car. It's a substantial percentage of your salary, unless you're a new neuroradiologist. Or a physicist.
Who drives the Volkswagen around?
So the Greeks fight wars often, as we'll see, but they do it more as like a duel. They don't want to kill everybody. They just want to settle their argument. And the way they do it is there's a conflict between 2 city-states. They put their men out on the field. More often than not, one lost nerve, and they lost. And that's it. When it came to blows, there was usually a push. Somebody decided that they weren't going to win, so they dropped their shield and they go. And you didn't chase people down. You didn't, maul people in the back as they're running away. You claim the victory, and that's it. So
Can I interrupt? Yeah. Is this similar to like what the
is that God?
well, actually, and many of us, not all, but many of us are familiar with the Israelite story of Goliath and David, where Goliath would go out in front of the Israel army and taunt them, and that was the classic, like kind of a Western showdown. Come on out, send your best man out, and he never did. but they just sort of hung out and not one attacking the other. And is that what they kind of did until one of them figured we can't do this?
It's that style of warfare, the champions of each side getting out there one-on-one. You hear about it in that era.
Correct.
You know, David and Goliath is, you know, maybe around 1000 BC. The Iliad is around 1000 BC, give or take a couple hundred years. And you have Achilles getting out there, or you have Aias or Ajax getting out there. Hector goes out there and he fights the other best guy. That was a style of warfare that was prevalent a few hundred years earlier in the Bronze Age. I don't know that. I think that the David and Goliath thing is more akin to that style of Bronze Age warfare than it is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, there's probably overlap. I mean, there's some closed range combat in the Iliad, and there's some people that think some of the phalangeal type of scenario were not always locked in step, that there was some opportunity for open combat. So there's probably a transition rather than a sharp dividing point between Bronze Age versus classical Greece.
So, but they would actually, they'd just hang out. I mean, really, there could be times, or how often would it be that you just have this face down and then eventually somebody turns down and run?
Well, it depends who you're fighting. If you're a little place who's fighting with Sparta, usually the Spartans get out there in their mirror-polished shields and helmets, and gosh, you think, I'm about to fight a city-state that hasn't lost a single battle in 200 years, and is it really worth whatever I'm fighting for to lose my life and for all my friends to lose their lives? I don't know that it was a majority of the time. I don't know if it was 25% of the time. The basic principle is that these are not, I'm going to kill every single person in your city sorts of battles. They're duels, they're for honor. This is the way they settle their disagreements. They're well armed. A lot of times it got in to the point where people are pushing against each other, and there's not a lot of dying going on because, you're poking with your shield, you're getting pushed from behind, and it just wasn't what they were interested in. They weren't interested in killing their fellow Greeks. They knew how special they were to each other, and they knew how similar they were in comparison to everybody else.
Yeah, the only problem with that argument, Dave, is if that was the case, then by the time they faced the Persians, at Thermopylae and other places, they would have been slaughtered. So, I mean, the idea that they were play fighting until they got into real war is not.
I'm not meaning to suggest that they're play fighting. What I'm meaning to suggest is the classical Greek war between city-states is not a everybody to the death battle for the most part. It will become so when the Persians invade.
Do we know what the disputes were between the city-states? Was it like,
economic things? You're harboring the person we don't like. Anything you can imagine. They were bickering all the time.
The other question is, that spear, that has two ends, right? So the one end is kind of facing forward, and the
one
other
end is a counterweight.
But isn't there like a killing side on the opposite end that's designed to kill people after you walk over them?
I don't know about that. I think it was pretty much a
spike
to go in the ground so that it doesn't
stay.
But I'm sure that it would be lethal. I don't know. I could be wrong about that.
Well, no, the idea is after you run somebody over, you don't have to reverse the 6-foot spear. You can just kind of jam them in the head and keep going.
I don't. You think? Maybe.
I have a thought that's what the rear range.
Well, because by the time you get to the Macedonian phalanx and the spears get longer, I mean, they definitely have an opposite end that's used for that purpose now.
I think
according to your theory, they're a lot civilized here. But
I think it's more of a counterweight.
David?
Yes.
It's clear, I'm sure as you get on into Alexander and so forth, the Greeks really become tough.
Yes.
And they become a different kind of animal. How much preceded this era in terms of, are they just beginning to learn how to fight?
They know how to fight. They haven't been in the circumstance where their homeland is a threat. So now there will be an era 50 years after this where Greeks will kill each other with impunity. I will gloss over that in about 10 seconds. But the Greeks are ferocious fighters, don't get me wrong. And they do turn on each other, and they do sort of implode in that way. But for the time being, suffice it to say that they're incredibly heavily armed, and they fight in an organized way in which they're dependent on each other, and they fight in this phalanx formation. So, does that mean plan? No.
Yeah, don't touch that.
Thanks. Okay. So here we are. This is Turkey. This is Asia Minor. These are the Greek islands that are controlled by Persia. And here is modern-day Greece. Well, here's Greece. Athens is right here. And there's a little triangle. There's a little wedge of land, a peninsula called Attica, which is where Athens is. So the Persians decide that they are going to sail to Athens. Now the Greeks know the Persians are coming, and they want the Spartans on their side because the Spartans are the best fighters. If you look at this guy, I mean, he looks like you want him on your team. The Spartans are,
Especially his arm.
yeah, no, that's a gnarly one. I think he was burned as a child. So it's the summer of 490 BC. The Persians are coming. The Greeks know it, and they want the Spartans to come and help. And the Spartans are supposedly happy to send help, but they can't because they are in the middle of a religious festival that they are bound to complete before they send off a force. And so the Spartans are held back, and we're left basically with the Athenians, who muster a force of about 9,000 infantry. Now I'm going to zoom in. So the Spartans are from here, which is the bottom part of Greece. And now I'm going to zoom into Attica here, which is where Athens is. And you see Athens here. And you see Marathon here, and the plains of Marathon. The Persians decided to send a force to Marathon because the Persians, unlike the Greeks, had a decent cavalry. And cavalry doesn't work in the mountains on the beach. Cavalry works on the plains where they can run. And so they decided to go to Marathon. That's where the battle is going to be. So the Athenians take their 9,000 men, and they put them, there's a mountain here, Penteleus, and their camp was up here. The Persians are camped here. And they're going to wait, basically. The Athenians are trying to ride it out because they want the Spartans to come and help. So we're zooming in again. Here are the plains of Marathon. Here's that peninsula. The mountain is over here and off the screen. And so here's the battlefield. The Persians have 30,000 men and a few thousand cavalry. Here's their plan. They're going to put several thousand men on the beach here. They're going to keep half their force on their ships. They're going to engage the Athenians on the plain with the people there. They're going to beat the Athenians. And while that battle is going on, they're going to sail with the other half of their force around Attica and take Athens, which is completely undefended, because all of the able men, all of the citizens, are at Marathon. So that's the Persian strategy. Persians put 15,000 men on the field, a few thousand cavalry. Athenians have 9,000. The day before the battle, a little place called Plataea also sends 1,000 men. So it's about 10,000 Greeks, about 15,000 Persian infantry, and some cavalry. So part of the Persian force are Greeks who are from Asia Minor, who are conscripts, and basically they're for the Greeks, but they're forced to fight. So some Greek-Persian forces sneak out at night, the night before the battle, and they tell the Athenian who is in charge of the army named Miltiades that the cavalry is going to be off foraging the next day. So that would be a great day to fight, because the cavalry will be dispersed trying to collect food for this army of 30,000. So the next day, Miltiades lines his army up, and he lines it up against a force of Persians, 15,000 Persians, who are not nearly as well armed. They have wicker shields, they have basically no metal on their bodies, and they're outgunned, but they have 50% more people. Persians will learn the next time that this isn't going to do the trick. So I think this is a little bit wrong in that there's a big march here. I think the Persian camp was on the other side of the march, and I'll tell you what why later. But the Persians line up. There are 15,000 men in a big block, basically, and the Greeks line up. And remember, it's important not to have your line shorter than the other line, because you got to protect your flanks. So you basically have to extend your line as far as possible so that people can't come around you to your undefended sides. So the Greeks have only 2/3 of the people of the Persians. So what they have to do is they have to thin out some part or all of their line to match the Persian length, which is around a mile and a half. So what they decide to do is thin out the center, because you have to protect your flanks. So they thin the center, and this is demonstrated here. And what happens in the battle is the Greeks are up sort of on a hill, and the Persian archers are out front. And Greeks don't have any archers on the battlefield at this time. So you're pretty much toast if you get, if they can just, with impunity, fire arrows at you. It doesn't matter. You're going to lose a lot of people. So for the first time, Herodotus tells us, in Greek history, the hoplites basically charge onto the battlefield and charge into the Persian phalanx. So the archers have to get the heck out of the way, and there's a big collision. Now, what you see here is what happens. The Persian center is much stronger than the Greek center, and the Greek center starts to give way, and in fact retreats a little bit. At the same time, the Greek wings, which are reinforced with respect to the center, are victorious. So the Persians on the wings start to flee, even as the Greeks in the middle start to flee. And I have made some simplistic diagrams that get more sophisticated as I learn how to use Photoshop. You'll see the other. So here's stage one, they collide. Now Herodotus tells us that as they run, you've got 1.5 miles of people, either 4 or 8 ranks deep, that are charging basically with locked arms.
Which is which?
Sorry, the Greeks are blue. Greeks are blue, Persians are purple, because they have pretty dyes and stuff over there. And the Greeks live around the water. And the Athenian color was blue. So the Greeks charge, and they end up in this sort of arc. And Herodotus tells us a little bit about that. The next stage, you see the Greeks in the middle breaking, and the Persians on the flanks breaking. Now, normally what I do is somebody that I'm fighting turns away, and I want to kill him, so I run after him. The Greeks have the presence of mind not to do that. So as the Persian flanks retreat, instead of following them, the Greek flanks turn on the center. And they collapse in what's called a pincer maneuver, which is sort of the classic maneuver in warfare. And the Persians know they're in big trouble. At the same time, the Greek center gathers its wits, counterattacks, and everybody collapses on the Persian center, which runs away. Now they run away across the marsh, And when you're running away and your back's exposed, that's a great way to die. And that's indeed how most people died in ancient warfare. The losses were worse after you break than before you break. So Herodotus tells us that 6,400 of the 15,000 or so Persians were killed, and 192 Greeks died. Meanwhile, you have to remember the other 15,000 Persians and a lot of their cavalry who have gotten back are sailing around to Athens, which is undefended. So after the victory, the Athenians set up a monument to their dead, and they march back from Marathon on a forced march back to Athens. It takes about a day for the fleet to sail around here. After a battle, the Greeks, in all of their armor, march back, not 26 miles as the modern Marathon is, but a few fewer than that, and actually are at the beach waiting when the Persians get there. The Persians see them, the same force that they just lost to, and the Persians go back to Persia. So that's the Battle of Marathon. What is at stake during the Battle of Marathon? Well, if the Persians defeat Athens, basically the source of all of our Western culture is gone before Aeschylus can write a second play. We have our earliest Greek dramatist is Aeschylus. He wrote his first in the mid-490s, and that would probably be all we have. Leon, you have a problem with that?
No, but I have a problem. I thought the Spartans made it to the battle at the end. And
Spartans came after the battle.
And
they wanted to see the battlefield. They wanted to see the monument to the dead. They did not make it for the battle.
What was the monument?
The monument, Greeks always set up a monument to their dead.
What was it? Like a pile of stones, you know, or...
I don't know, some sort of stone commemoration.
Okay. Is it still there?
I do not believe it's still there.
Okay.
Now there is one that is still there from a battle I will talk about, and that's why I guess that it is a stone statue of some sort with an inscription, because they did that in at least 2 places that we know of.
But if these guys marched back to the beach, apparently the monument they set up had been hastily built.
I think they buried their dead, they did a little thing, and then
they cremated them.
Okay.
they cremated them.
Okay.
And
But they took care of all this time, just put their monument up and took back off to home.
Yeah, I actually do have a problem with that scenario because, I mean, you know, this kind of what-if turning points of history, I think, are overstated. I mean, you know, you have this Greek culture going into, you know, Sparta and Corinth and all these other cities, and I mean, who's to say that just because they killed, you know, every Athenian...
Sparta and Corinth came up with some nice pottery 100 years earlier.
Yeah, but the point of it... Yeah,
Sparta didn't care about anything except for...
No, I understand that. That's how it played out in the historical, but you can't say just what, you know, you would have destroyed an entire culture with one battle.
I find it highly likely that you would have destroyed a whole culture with one battle.
Well, you may have shifted the balance, I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe Sparta would have
it would have been a different, you know, course. I mean, it would have changed history, but I don't think it would have been as drastic as a result of a single battle.
Maybe not. Well, the Persians will get another chance.
The one thing that's interesting about Marathon is that, you know, they basically charged 1.5 miles wearing 60 pounds of bronze armor. And I don't know if you've heard the story of the classics professor 40 years ago who tried to replicate it, and he made it about 30 feet or something.
Well, there was another experiment where they had phys ed students do it, and I think one person made it like out of 50. So
he made it 1.5 miles?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Herodotus is exaggerated, some for, you know, for dramatic effect, and some for, you know, just not lack of factual information. So it's very likely that 1.5 miles was not 1.5 miles.
Well, the 1.5 miles was the cross, was the width of the line. The range of archers that you would have to run, the range of archers is more on the order of a couple hundred yards.
200 yards probably. 2, 3.
These guys are good.
No, I
Yeah, but
think
they're not in with one
Weapons,
moment.
yeah.
Well, I agree with Leon, though. I think that obviously you've got a Greek historian, kind of embellishing potentially the facts. So, I mean, there is that obvious risk as we have to look back and we deconstruct, history in a way. But on the other hand, I think we have to, pick out what we can. But
well, the other inconsistency is, the whole strength of the phalanx depends on their formation, and if they break formation to trot along for a mile, I mean, how do they, resume their formation, quickly enough to get?
Well, they certainly did that during Alexander's time.
But that was a
They did that
different.
over and over
That's a
again.
different phalanx. He'll talk about the Macedonian phalanx is a little bit different structure, different weaponry too.
One question I had, David, was, you said the Athenians had a presence of mind to collapse in out of the center. I mean, is that just a
Or that was
fortuitous
the
thing?
plan.
Was it a fortuitous thing, or you don't know? I mean, necessarily.
Nobody knows.
Okay.
One of the clear benefits to beforehand reinforcing your wings versus your center is that you assume your wings are going to win.
Okay.
And it is not, and it's very well known that if you take people in the flank, they're going to lose in this age. So it could easily have been a preconceived plan, and everybody knew, hey, you're likely to win on the flanks. If you do, turn in towards the center.
Okay, by everybody, we mean Greek culture, but maybe not Persians.
Maybe not.
It doesn't seem that far-stretched. I mean, these people aren't morons. I mean, you surround the enemy, you attack from the sides. I mean, I can't imagine that these Persians are like, wow, we never thought of that. I mean, I don't know much about military history, but I mean, these guys have been fighting for thousands of years, and I mean, you would think that surrounding your enemy is really advantageous.
But they seem so
I have to say
unprepared.
something about the Athenians, though. I think that maybe you make too little of the Athenians. If there's a guy, I can't remember his name, there's a guy at Penn who's done a lot of stuff on Greek history, and you really get the feeling that there's the folks in Athens, and then there's the provinces. And Sparta is an entirely different kettle of fish. It's an entirely different
But they're
world view, really. I mean, they're great fighters, but it's almost a totalitarian sort of world view. And then if you take the Persians and take that extraordinarily centralized, despotic government and think of what might have happened to Greece under that sort of a regime, I think that the effects might have been quite significant in terms of what happened to the development of Greek culture. I don't say it would have vanished entirely or anything like that, but hey, I think to go ahead and to say, nothing would have happened, I think that's going way in the other direction.
There clearly are other examples of that over the history of cultures really suffering when they lose.
So these were the campaigns that I talked about, and you see the Persians sailing around Attica to Athens and sailing back. Well, the next time they decided to really do it right. The next time was 10 years later. It was 480 BC, where they started the march maybe a couple of years before that. The first time they sent, we don't know how many people, lost in a storm and turned back. The second time they sent 30,000. They were outclassed. The third time, the king is Xerxes, I believe also known from the Bible. Xerxes decides that he's going to really, really do it. So here's the Persian Empire. And you see Greece all the way, lonely Greece over there, little place. And so the Persians amass a force with considerable strength. The ancient sources probably exaggerate the strength. The modern sources, I think, probably underestimate the strength. Herodotus gives, over 1 million. The other quasi-contemporary people give on the order of 1,800,000, 300,000. Modern historians suggest things like 50,000. A word of caution about modern estimates. Number one, again, if you're the Persian king and you are in control of all of the wealth from India to Egypt, to the Fertile Crescent and beyond, you probably have a lot of money and you have a lot of people that you can pull up. I think the biggest issue is what kind of horde can you feed off the land as they go like locusts and eat everything in their path. You know, 1 million hungry guys, not to mention the pack animals and the cooks and the girlfriends.
Those hungry girlfriends.
Yeah.
Red lights are there.
They come along behind.
Is this all able-bodied young men?
Yeah, but this is millions and millions and millions of people. Yeah. So I don't know how many they sent. I would say they probably sent less than 1 million and more than 300,000. It doesn't really matter. They sent a lot of people.
David, why are they directed in that direction?
Why do they care?
Why do they go that way as opposed to other directions?
They're upset at the
Cyrus
Athenians for
got
helping
killed
them
up
out.
here. The northeastern extent of Cyrus's empire ended at the Miltiades because he lost that battle. There are populous empires of Indians over here. The Indus is quite a physical boundary. That's where Cyrus ended over there. There's nothing anybody cares of in Egypt. All of this up here is cold steppe. Nobody cares about, I don't even know what, that's Russia or something. Nothing's up there.
Latvia.
Yeah, Estonia is up there. And the Athenians really ticked off the Persians, and that's where they're going. The Athenians, the Athenians have beaten them fairly once. The Persians, a second time, have lost a huge fleet. So that's who they want to beat, is the way I think about it. So they amass a huge force. And we will, okay, I want to talk about here, remember the first fleet tried to go around Mount Athos and was sunk. The second fleet didn't want to go around Mount Athos, so Xerxes told his engineers to, and you can follow it here. Gosh, that's a bad image. You can, so as the fleet comes around here, instead of coming out, Xerxes had his engineers, Herodotus tells us, carve a canal through the base of the peninsula, so the fleet could go through instead of around Mount Athos. So, assuming that that could be true, that would be quite a feat of engineering. My only point is to say that these are not idiots. These are advanced cultures, even though they lived a long time ago, and they could do remarkable things. Whether or not it happened, Herodotus tells us that, and we don't hear a lot of complaints until like 1930.
The DNC is not that big, not that rough or anything.
It's not that rough. It's stormy. It's stormy, and if you sail in the wrong time of year, you could be in trouble. And if you put all your eggs in one basket, you could potentially be in a lot of trouble. The Persians lost half a fleet due to a storm in a little while. So it happened frequently.
They have to build a bridge to get across to Europe, too. Right?
They built a bridge. They built a bridge across what we call, I can't even see where I'm pointing, but is it just my angle? Can you see anything here?
Not right now. The yellow squeeze right on.
There is...
Just point with authority and say, of course you all see here.
See, there's a fracture, look.
It looks like a mammoth.
There you go.
You already said, repeat that.
And I hope none of you missed the obvious answer.
mess with the brightness?
It's just the native
Okay.
image.
All right. Well, at any rate, there's a body of water that was spanned by pontoons. It's called the Hellespont. It's basically the bridge between northwestern Turkey and Europe, and it was pontooned and everybody was sent across. So what happens next? The Persian army is coming overland here. They're demanding tribute from everyone, and everybody pretty much says okay. And they come, now Greece is a mountainous place, and there are only a few passes that you can get people through. It's just the physical facts. So the Persian army is coming down here, and they plan to go through the pass by a little place called Thermopylae. And everybody in Greece knows it. And so they send a force. They send a delaying force. They send a suicide mission, basically. There are 500 Spartans who have male heirs. And there are 300 male Spartans. There are 300 Spartan citizens with male heirs. And approximately 4,700, the number we get is 5,000, allied soldiers who decide to defend the pass at Thermopylae.
What do you mean by allied soldiers? Just other
Greeks.
Okay.
Not Spartan Greeks.
Okay. And as a result, these are pretty much the ancient kamikazes, is what we call them?
Yeah, sort
Okay.
of. This may be a good time to stop because to take a break because Joe's about to run out of battery or something.
Phil.
Don't.
No.
There's a restroom right through that little alcove.
Ready, Joe? We're recording for my mom, who will be very mad if she can't watch.
Hi, Mom.
So it's August 11th, 480 BC, and there are 5,000 Greeks, including 300 Spartans, who are guarding a pass at Thermopylae, which is right, let's see, here's Euboea. Okay,
Right
Thermopylae
there.
is right there. Now, the track, the pass is small, but how small, I don't know. There are suggestions that it's only a cart path or a couple of carts path wide. So you can imagine how it would be easy for a small, well-armed force to fend off a bunch of people in a bottleneck like that. So there is a big battle on August 11th, 480, and actually for 2 days afterwards, where basically every man on the Greek side dies. But what they do is they delay the Persian army for a few days. The same day as the beginning of the Battle of Thermopylae, there is a sea battle off of the Cape of Artemisium, in which the Greek naval forces sort of skirmish with the Persians, get an idea of what's going on, and basically they're indecisive battles. But I think they probably teach the Greeks a little bit about what they're dealing with as far as naval warfare goes. The Athenians, in the meantime, know that the Persians are coming straight down. They're going to be in Attica in a couple of days. And they have sent preemptively a message to the oracle, a question to the oracle at Delphi, saying, what do we do? How do we escape this? What should we do right now? And the oracle at Delphi always responds in some sort of enigmatic way. And they say that and I'm paraphrasing, that you need to hide behind the wooden walls. And some people, a minority of people, took the wooden walls to mean the inner sanctuary of the Parthenon, which was wood at that time. It was rebuilt by Pericles a couple of generations later into the Parthenon that we visit today. But the Parthenon was a wooden structure at that time. Some people fled to the inner sanctum of the Parthenon. Most of Attica evacuated. And maybe... most of Attica evacuates. This is Jacques-Louis David's Battle of Thermopylae with with Leonidas, the namesake of my cat, in the middle. Leonidas probably would have been wearing more than that at the battle. It's hot. It's very hot. So the Persians are coming down into Attica. Here they are through Thermopylae, down into Attica. Delphi is right here. All of Attica is going to be evacuated. Most of Athens goes across the Straits of Salamis, which are here, to the island of Salamis, which is the home island of the Greek hero Ajax from the Iliad. That was the famous person from Salamis. So a lot of the Greek population is here on Salamis because they think that at least maybe the huge land forces won't be able to get through. Now, there is the leader in Athens at the time is named Themistocles, and he plays a couple of tricks. He plays a couple of strategic tricks on the Persians. The first thing is he says, listen, there are people manning ships in the Persian Navy who are Greeks. They're those Greeks over in Turkey and in Western Asia Minor. And he says, listen, when the fighting starts, attack the Persians. If you aren't willing to do that, at least fight badly. And if you're not willing to do that, try to flee or do something, but don't fight against us.
How do you get to talk to them?
You know, they have spies going back and forth.
Cell phones.
Cell phones. The second thing he does, and meanwhile, the Greeks are arguing about where this battle is going to take place. Themistocles wants it to be in the Straits of Salamis. The Spartans and others don't want it to be there. And there's a lot of bickering back and forth. On the eve of the Battle of Salamis, which is September the 23rd, the birthday of Euripides. Euripides was born on the same day as the Battle of Salamis. September the 23rd, 480 BC. On the eve of that battle, Themistocles sends word to the Persians in command, or lets it leak out, that they are going to try to escape from these narrow straits of Salamis to other waters where they feel that they will be better suited to fight. Now, the Greeks and the Persians are using the same naval technology. They're fighting in a trireme. It's tri because there are three rows of people rowing. And basically what you do in a trireme, for the most part, is you try to ram people and either sink them by ramming them or board them and kill them after you have run into them. So here is the map that we're familiar with. We're talking about this area right here, which I'm going to zoom into. And now we're talking about Athens being right here, the Straits of Salamis here, Salamis the island here. That's it today, so that you know that I'm not lying to you. And as we zoom in on it, there is a promontory right here, a peninsula called the Canusura. Athens is over here. We're going to zoom in on that. Here's that promontory. Athens is up. Athens is over there. So the Persians have a big fleet. How big? We don't know. Maybe it's exaggerated. We're guessing. People guess between 800 and 1,200 triremes. Herodotus specifically says the Greeks have 378. Now, when you have a big force, you want a lot of space to operate in. When you have a little force, you want, just like at Thermopylae, to limit your sort of surface area and be able to defend it. So the Persians get tricked here. The Greeks are in this narrow strait. The Persians have a lot of forces, and the Greeks lure them in. There are Greek ships back here and back here, and Themistocles has tricked the Persians into believing that they are going to sail out of here and find someplace else to go. The Persians go into the straits to follow them and send a contingent of Egyptians around Salamis to catch them on the other side to pin them in. It's exactly what Themistocles wants, because he has put back here hidden a large number of his triremes. So when the Persians follow them in the straits, the Greeks, in a feint move, try to escape. Then the hidden forces come out on the Persian flank, and the Greeks turn around, and now they've outflanked them, and they're taking them from the front and from the rear. It's a hard fight. Xerxes, the king of Persia, is on the promontory here, and as you may read in Aeschylus's The Persians, Xerxes watches as his entire force is destroyed. Aeschylus fought in the Battle of Marathon and the Battle of Salamis. And so he was there at the time, and he wrote a play that comes down to us commemorating this event. There he is. On the same day, there are Carthaginians here. Carthaginians are allied with Persia because they come from Phoenicia, which is modern-day Lebanon. So the great king Xerxes has told the Carthaginians, I want you to attack from the west. So they attack Sicily. Sicily is the home of the strongest force in the Greek world. They're from Syracuse. The general's name is Gelon, and all the Greeks want him to come and fight in Greece.
It's called the Mafia.
Gelon refuses, not only because he's being attacked by Carthaginians from the west, but because the Greeks refuse to give him total control of the Greek army. So Gelon, who we only know about from a couple of sources, fights a huge battle at a place called Himera right here. They tell us on the same day as the Battle of Salamis. Birthday of Euripides, Battle of Salamis, Battle of Himera. All on the same day.
Does he win?
He wins. He wins with some number against approximately, they say, 300,000 Carthaginians. So what happens next is the Persian army the Persian navy is completely annihilated. So again, the army is left all the way over here in Greece with no supplies. They stay for the winter, and then there's a battle here at Plataea where the Greeks basically totally rout the Persians. By that time, some of the Persian stragglers have gotten back. The Greek navy is a juggernaut at this time. And right here at the mountain of Mycale, right across from Samos, in 479 BC, the Persian army and navy is finally defeated. The navy is completely gone, and the entire Aegean is cleared of the Persians. Now, what happens at this point? Well, Athens has this meteoric rise in power. This is entitled the Athenian Empire. Athens controls by force or by influence basically all of the Aegean islands. And Athenian culture flourishes after this point, for the most part after this point. Now what happens, how does it happen in a city the size of Wilmington? 30,000 males of voting age, or of fighting age. How does it happen that in the course of 3 or 4 generations, the place the size of Wilmington comes up with Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, great statesmen like Pericles, Alcibiades, artists that we know of by reputation, if not by work, musicians whose works we've never heard of, but we are told that they were as great or greater than the artists. How does a place come up with this sort of genius? And how has that never happened? There's something special going on.
Chromosome 37.
Well, it's either a genetic disorder. Leon may disagree with me, but I think it's a combination of self-governance. This is a direct democracy. This is every person goes and votes every day on issues that matter. It's not representative democracy. It's a direct democracy. It's a society in which it's a sort of capitalistic society. You work hard on your land for your money, and finally you have all this self-confidence, and it's well documented. The Athenians knew how special they were. The Athenians knew how huge their victories were in the scope of history, or at least what they thought turned out to be what we think. It was that important, and they knew it, and they had the self-confidence. And I think a combination of those things bred the sort of inspiration that has rarely happened since. The only thing I can equate it to is sort of the artistic movement in Florence in the Renaissance under the Medici. That was in art. We're talking about art, philosophy, music, science, math, literature, governance.
But you just said three bases were governance, the economy,
Direct democracy.
Yeah, the economy, and I think the third thing,
Self-confidence.
Self-confidence.
I think economy is number one of those three.
I think it's genetic.
But you're saying that these things spawn out of a city the size of Wilmington, these greats. And I'm not saying that it's hard to swallow, but in fact, it kind of is.
But
If you put that same bunch in Wilmington today, they do the same thing. Purely genetic.
I don't know.
I mean, they're clearly impressive people. I mean, they're clearly, you can read the writings of, Plato and Aristotle. Right, and we read them and we go, these are thoughtful individuals, but you're attributing it to...
They started a culture. They started a whirlwind of culture that has lasted for 2,500 years that we are the heirs of.
No, I agree. No, I'm not disagreeing. But what you're saying, why it rose up.
Why?
And that's
debatable. That's debatable.
I mean, and that's why I'm kind of...
You got to remember.
interjecting.
You got to remember it's democracy, but women can't vote. I mean, it's not. There's a lot of issues with it. Even if you're, even if you're a wealthy person, you move to Athens, you can't become citizens, so you can't vote. So they're not. You're not talking democracy as equivalent with tolerance in the modern sense.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very intolerant of outsiders. I mean, they're very xenophobic. So you can be the wealthiest merchant living in Athens, you can't vote. You're a woman, you can't vote. About 30% are slaves, so you have an economy that's propped up by slavery, much different than the African American slaves. But still, people that can't vote. I mean, they may have nicer living conditions in some cases. So, and much of their navy was funded by some mines that they discovered kind of at the turn of the century. So, I mean, there was a lot of economic influx that I think made for, I wouldn't call it the middle class, but the class that had enough time to philosophize and write plays and all that, which may not have existed before. But I think it's a little bit ethnocentric to place those developments, and say they didn't occur anywhere else. There's a German philosopher writing in the 30s of 20th century called Karl Jaspers, that basically refers to this period as axial age, and he points out to similar developments in the Orient, because, I mean, you're talking 5th century BC is the age of Buddha. Buddhism is alive and well now, 2,500 years later. It's the age of Confucius. It's the age of whoever the Taoist main guy is, Lao Tse, I think. So you have a lot of similar kind of pivotal developments that are occurring almost at the same time in Asia as they're occurring. And actually some of the philosophies are similar. I mean, if you compare Plato or some Plato to Buddha and some pre-Socratic philosophers, I mean, there's actually some parallels in intellectual history as well. So, I mean, that's not to negate how special the Greeks are, but I think to say that they're so unique that they're like a different species, they're Martians, we couldn't have ever had a civilization without them, I think is a little bit silly. I mean, I think human kind of evolution.
We certainly wouldn't have our civilization.
Right.
But I wouldn't say that David is necessarily saying that. What I'm just trying to, what spawns this kind of thinking, and I guess in our own culture, I can think of a few names, of whom people that have had a huge impact. One, Albert Einstein, who has done a lot of thinking about the natural world and its effects. That I think what he has said is and what he attempted to say in many ways, and he wasn't always right, but is going to live on for quite some time. But in any event, I was just somewhat debating, that democracy, even a pure democracy, would lead to it. But perhaps, Leon was right that maybe there's a lot more, the development of the middle class and even an upper class where people had time to just think. Is what
actually, I think the main technological development is proliferation of writing, because I think once you have the Greek alphabet set, and once you have, in the 7th century, the oral tradition of Homer transmitted to writing, I think, the birth of philosophy follows pretty soon with, all the pre-Socratics, like in the early 6th century. So I think just that development of being able to write down your thoughts and read back your thoughts, I think propels civilization forward dramatically. And I mean, it's not to say that there was no writing before that with Gilgamesh and Egyptians and everything else.
Could write,
but the
Thebans could write.
But it becomes proliferated. I mean, they're able to record and put their national identity, their Greek culture into writing, and I think that really kind of
makes
a good
thing.
Yeah.
But I think that, and I think we all recognize that writing's nice, and without it, no civilization of any kind, of any sort. But I think that and I have no idea why there was this concentration of intellect and achievement in this small area. I just don't know. But I think that the achievement is different. I think it's different from what happened in China. I think it's different from what happened in India. And I think it has to do with individualism. I think the one thing that is characteristic, probably more so, of the West, and what is really still having its extraordinary effect around the world, not just in the West, but around the world, which is being reacted against in many places, is individualism and the respect for the individual. And I think that was, not there the way we might think of it today, but I think that sort of thinking is not part of Buddhism, is not part
but
of
that
Taoism.
doesn't. No, I agree with you. You're exactly on target. The individualism is completely Western, but that doesn't make it. I mean, from our vantage point, it seems right, but from a Buddhist vantage point, it doesn't. I mean, I'm not willing to judge the Buddhists and say we're right and they're wrong.
I'm willing to judge all sorts of people. I love judgment. Let's judge. Doggone it. No judgment. Let's judge. That's what this is
go
about.
ahead, but I don't want to judge.
I judge them as not being successful compared to Western civilization.
Okay, let's move on. This map simply demonstrates that there was a 50-year period in the history of Greece, 40 years, 30 years, however you want to date it, of Greek civil wars. The Persians are, as far as massive forces, out of the picture. And the Greeks fight in basically two confederations, the Spartan people versus the Athenian people. And they beat each other to death. And they really kick the life out of each other to a great extent. Athenian direct democracy, a lot of the glimmer in Athens is dead after these Peloponnesian wars, and it's definitely a period of transition, which is not to say that Athens doesn't continue to be a force culturally, but the Athenian golden age is certainly over.
Well, I think also if you look at other city-states, I mean, they're kind of in between the spectrum of Sparta, which is kind of totalitarian monarchy, and Athens, which is a direct democracy. So, I mean, there's all sorts of different governances happening, in Thebes and Delphi and all the other little city-states.
I want to give special mention to Xenophon. Xenophon is an Athenian. He is an aristocrat, and he has been employed after the Athenians have been beaten in the Peloponnesian Wars by the Spartans. He has been employed by the brother of the Persian king. Persia is still a huge force outside of Greece. They've just lost their influence in Greece. Xenophon and 10,000 Greek mercenaries, March of the 10,000, have been employed by the brother of the Persian king to usurp the throne. Everybody knows Greek soldiers are better than Persian soldiers. And Xenophon is one of the lieutenants who gets 10,000 Greek mercenaries to fight their way all the way nearly to Babylon and to win a battle in which the person they're fighting for, the brother of the Persian king, dies. So Xenophon is left with 10,000 Greeks, more or less, in the middle of Iraq with nobody to fight for, and they just got to get home somehow. So it's a great story. He was a general, and he wrote this book called the Anabasis, which is the upcountry march. They are marching upcountry to the sea so that they can get home. This demonstrated to the Greeks, as was told by Xenophon, who wrote books that Alexander the Great had. This demonstrated to the Greeks that Greeks could take small numbers, 10,000. They could walk into the Persian Empire. They could defeat the Persians at every battle, and they could walk out and get home. That's the lesson of Xenophon.
I think that's where George Bush got the preemptive strike.
I also want to give honorable mention to two city-states. Sparta, who beat Athens in the Peloponnesian War, who had a couple decades, maybe 30 years of hegemony over Greece. The Greeks really hated the Spartans because they were much more totalitarian. It's like an American empire that nobody likes until they realize what a Soviet empire would be like.
What are the years we're talking?
The Spartan hegemony, lasts from, 411 BC to 471 BC, and I say 471 because there's a city-state here called Thebes, who had a leader called Epaminondas. If I were giving a military history lecture, he would have a central role. Epaminondas was really the first person to innovate on the hoplite battle tactics. And Epaminondas fought 2 battles against the Spartans, beat them both times. Only time Spartans, first and second time the Spartans ever lost battles. Sparta then declined greatly. Much of the reason they declined was because of the loss of manpower they had during the Peloponnesian Wars. But then Thebes had a short ascendancy for 9 years, called the Theban hegemony. Okay? I just wanted to talk about Epaminondas because he is a really central person.
During this era, David,
yeah.
were there wars going on all the time?
During the Peloponnesian War, there were wars all the time.
The Peloponnesian War is like 27 years,
yeah.
And then after it's over, Thebes, Sparta, and Athens continue on fighting each other for like 50 more years. So I mean, it's not really, you really don't get a protracted period of peace.
No.
It's kind of like Ireland.
There's really no peace until Philip II conquers Greece, which will come next.
I mean, really, the most peaceful period is between the Persian War and the Peloponnesian War, the period of classical Greece that we were talking about, where all the developments occur. And that may be part of the reason, but I mean, the reason it's peaceful is because Athens is pretty, I mean, they're democratic at home, but they're completely imperialistic and despotic with everybody else. I mean, they basically have an ironclad monopoly on any shipping that goes down the Aegean, because they have the largest navy, so they control all of commerce.
And they support the democracies and kill the oligarchs in all these places in the Aegean.
Didn't Helen of Troy come from Sparta?
Helen of Troy was married to Menelaus, who was the king of Sparta. Agamemnon was the king of Mycenae. So yeah, Helen was from Sparta.
That's 700 years before that.
Yeah, that was 700, 800 years earlier. If you can believe Heinrich Schliemann. Well, actually, he didn't. Okay. So Philip II. Who in the world is Philip II? Greeks are down here. They speak Greek. They like themselves a lot. They think everybody else is a barbarian. That includes people who speak Macedonian. What is Macedonian? Nobody really knows. Is it a primitive Greek dialect? Is it an unsophisticated Greek dialect? Is it a related language? I don't know. But there are people up here in Macedonia. Philip II rose to power. Philip II was the great military innovator of the ancient world, period. he had a famous son who we might meet later. But he lived up here, and he controlled, with his military innovations, a large swath of southeastern Europe down here, the Balkan Peninsula. His military innovation was a new kind of phalanx. It's called the Macedonian phalanx. And here are some innovations. Instead of an 8-foot, 6-foot, 8-foot spear, they have an 18-foot or 20-foot spear that keeps people farther away. They are remarkably agile with the right training. With the wrong training, they're not, and it's hard to wield one of these huge things in formation quickly and keep everybody together. But Philip was able to train people to do it.
Are they wooden? They're pieces of wood?
I think the shafts were wood, and the tips were
really
iron.
heavy.
Yeah.
Incredibly heavy.
Yeah, and they held them as opposed to the regular hoplite spear, which was held with one hand and a spear in the other. They were held with both hands, and the spear and the shield was strapped to them. So they didn't have to hold the shield. They just held the spear like this and moved forward like that. This is a picture of the Macedonian phalanx. Instead of standing 8 deep, generally they stood 16 deep. And there's this hedge of pikes that you can't penetrate. There were several rows. These are called sarissas. The sarissas would be held several ranks deep, would be projecting forward, and then other ranks would have them gradually angling up to deflect arrows. And now here we go. Okay. Another thing that happened is cavalry in the day of Athens and Sparta was a force that harassed your supply lines. It maybe went and bothered the people in your camp. It was not a heavy force that hammered through infantry. Philip developed a heavy cavalry, which was used in much the same way cavalry came to be used for the next 2,000 years. This was the first time there was a heavy cavalry, which really made a difference in Greek warfare. The person who was in charge of the Greek cavalry was this guy, who we'll get to a little bit later. His name was Alexander, that's Philip's son. But Philip decided that he was going to take over Greece, and so he marched down, and near Thebes, right there, at a little city called Chaeronea, he fought a battle. Now the Athenians and the Thebans were the real forces in Greece at this time. Spartans were sort of just worn out, and they didn't matter anymore. Athenians and the Thebans had slightly lighter equipped hoplites. They were more agile, but they were less well armed. And here's the Battle of Chaeronea, 338 BC. Athenians on the left, Thebans on the right. The Theban sacred band, which was a very famous group of soldiers who never lost a battle until here, and actually were the first people to trounce on the Spartans 40 years earlier, are fighting on the right, which is a position of honor and also where you put your best people because you have to defend your right flank. So Philip arranges people in oblique order. I'll show you what happens here. See, I'm getting better at Photoshop. Philip has 32,000 infantry. He's in black. Anything with a cross through it is cavalry. 2,000 cavalry on the left flank of the Macedonian army. Athenians on the left, Confederates in the middle, and Thebans on the right with the sacred band on the extreme right. Philip is on the right side of his formation. That's where you always put your best people. And he advances. He advances into an oblique order, which is to say that this is angled instead of straight across. The Athenians, who see that it's time to strike, attack. Now, Philip decides to retreat. And the Athenians are very excited about this because this is the point when they're really going to win, because when you retreat, that's when you inflict your most losses. But Philip has trained his phalanx to be able to be agile enough to retreat and then turn around on his command. So it's really a feint. So the Macedonians are retreating, the Athenians are following them. The Thebans, who are more disciplined, are staying still. So here the Athenians are following the retreating Macedonians back, and a gap opens up in the line, which is a bad idea. Alexander the Great takes the Campanian cavalry and he drives them into the gap. At the same time, Philip's supposedly retreating forces turn around, and the Athenians realize what a bad predicament they're in, and basically they flee. Everybody throws down their shield and they run. Meanwhile, Alexander is here, breaching the gap. And now the Thebans are outflanked by the cavalry. The Athenians are running away. And the entire Macedonian force of 30,000 collapses on them. And there's really nothing they can do. The Theban sacred band never lost a battle. Fights to the death, every man. And Philip, as a commemoration in respect to this group, erects a statue of a lion on the battlefield of Chaeronea, which can still be seen today if you go to the battlefield. There's a lion there that Philip put there. So now Philip owns all of... Whoops.
And they found the grave of the sacred... I mean, they have like 243 out of them.
And they dug up a grave right under there. So now Philip owns everything in red. Philip is assassinated soon thereafter. People thought Alexander did it then, or suggested that he might. Conspiracy theories were rife then, as they are now. But now we come to the age of Alexander.
Was that simply because he was power hungry?
It's simply because he was the obvious person to benefit. Alexander was born in 356 BC. That battle was in 338, which means he was 18. Within a few years, Philip was dead. By 335 BC, 3 years after the battle I just discussed, so by the time Alexander was 21, he was invading Asia. He was 21 when he invaded Asia.
But he's 20 when Philip dies.
He takes his army, well, I'll show you where he takes his army. Macedonia is here. He takes his army across the Hellespont, and there's a river here. It's called the Granicus River. And he fights a battle there. The local Persians decide they're going to put up a local force because there's this 21-year-old pipsqueak from Macedonia. Who's ever heard of that place? We trounced it 100 years ago. Who has brought some people, and so some local people try to defend it. Alexander kills everybody, and the next time, 2 years later, they'll fight a bigger battle. But for the time Alexander decides to roam around, set all these Greek people free, he goes to a place called Gordium. Anybody ever heard of Gordian knot? Gordian knot was, Alexander went to Gordium and they had a knot, sort of like King Arthur. If you can untie the knot, you will own the Persian Empire. Nobody could untie the knot because all the ends were in the middle and you couldn't figure out. Alexander takes a sword, chops it in two, finds the ends, unties it. It's a legendary story. Who knows if it's true? But it tells you something about the boldness of Alexander.
He also goes to Troy.
He tried to find Troy. He can't find it because Troy is 3 miles inland because of the 800 or 900 years difference in where the shore is. He can't find it. He roams around for a few days. Where's Troy? This is very much an attempt to, number one, avenge Athens, and number two, to be the new Greek great Achilles, or the Heracles. All of the coins from the Alexandrian age show his profile with a lion skin hat or cape, which is what Achilles wore. Alexander very purposefully tried to portray himself as Achilles or Heracles. I've been meaning to say Heracles all this time with the lion.
He almost gets killed at that first battle.
He almost gets killed in many of his battles.
Oh, he gets killed.
He almost gets killed in the first battle, and then the person that that saves him ends up being one of his big commanders, and he ends up killing him in a drinking
his name
party. At a symposium, he killed him.
Yeah.
Alumni meeting.
His name was Parmenio. So Alexander moves down here at the bend here in Syria or Turkey. This is the Gulf of Issus, and he fights a battle of Issus where the Persian king Darius III decides instead of sending his governors with a force to fight him, he's going to bring his troops and fight him himself. Here is a picture of Alexander going straight toward Darius in the Battle of Issus. Darius flees, leaves his mother, wife, sister, his entire camp. His mother is mortified and takes Alexander as her son. And Darius is sort of the laughingstock. And Alexander has shown himself to be a real force, not just some guy who can beat some local governors.
What is that picture?
That picture is from a wall. This is a mosaic preserved at Pompeii. So Alexander wins the Battle of Issus. He comes down here to the Phoenician city of Tyre, which 200 years earlier held out for 10 years against Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. It takes Alexander 7 months to build one causeway, have it destroyed by the Tyrian fleet, to build his own fleet, build a second causeway, storm the city, kill every man, sell every woman and child into slavery as a lesson. And subsequently, here's some of his siege technology, which isn't really bettered until the canon 2,000 years later.
What is it?
It's a sort of a catapult. These things fire either iron arrows or stones.
How does it work?
It's basically
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's sort of a bow. It's sort of a crossbow.
It's like a giant crossbow.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So Alexander wins Tyre. There's a lesson has been learned. He walked down into Egypt to accept them as their pharaoh. He goes to an oracle who says he is the son of Zeus. He comes back up here. Darius sends him a letter. Darius says, "Tell you what, I will give you everything west of the Tigris River, and let's be friends." And Alexander says, first of all, you can't give me what I already own. And second of all, don't talk to me like an equal because I'm your king.
To whom? Cyrus?
To Darius, the Persian king. So Darius knows that he's in big trouble. And Alexander marches up here, marches back up here, and they meet on the plains of Gaugamela. Now Darius brings to the battle 300,000 people, if you believe the estimates. 300,000 troops from all over Red Sea, Babylon, Albania, Medes, Bactria is Afghanistan. He brings everything because he knows that this is the showdown, 300,000. Alexander has 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Here's Alexander's forces, which I'll get to. Suffice it to say, you want your flanks protected when you're vastly outnumbered. So he arranged people in an angle here, almost a box, so that no matter how he was attacked, he would have people to defend. Basically, he had no flanks. I'm getting better at Photoshop. The Persians in purple because they have dyes. The Macedonians and Greeks who were fundamental in Alexander's army in black.
What about the elephants? Where are they?
Elephants are here but not displayed. 25 elephants, I think, were brought to this battlefield. It was the first time elephants were used outside of India. Darius had some secret weapons. These things are chariots with, on their wheels, blades that were supposed to drive into the formations of infantry and slice people up. Alexander had tactics to deal with those, and they were basically completely ineffective. The Persians, as you might expect, tried to outflank the Macedonians. Alexander knows that this is going to happen, and he starts walking diagonally with his cavalry. You can't see it, but all that's cavalry. He starts walking diagonally, and he is trying to make the Persians think that he is going to walk off of the prepared battlefield. The battlefield is prepared for the vast hordes of Persian cavalry. And so Alexander is walking obliquely off the field. So the Persians decide they need to outflank him. So all these Persian cavalry go this way, all these Persian cavalry go this way as Alexander goes this way. And you'll see the shift here. So now Alexander's line is oblique. Persian cavalry are flanking here and here. Some Persian cavalry see a gap in the middle of Alexander's line, know that the queen and princess and queen mother are in the baggage camp, and they go straight for the baggage camp. They get to the baggage camp, and Darius' mother says, I think I'm going to sit tight. I'm betting on Alexander for this one. So she stays. What's happening over here is the people who are on the right flank angled back are engaging this cavalry. The people on the left Macedonian flank angled back are engaging this cavalry. As I said, the chariots are rebuffed. And Alexander now sees that there is a gap right here. And he takes his companion cavalry and he arranges them into a wedge and throws them into the gap. Meanwhile, there's a counteroffensive with Greek infantry and Macedonian infantry that rebuffs this attack on the baggage camp. And these people are holding, and these people are holding. The main thrust, obviously, is here. And Alexander goes straight for Darius. When they see that, well, when Darius sees that, he flees again, as he did 2 years earlier at the Battle of Issus. And when the king runs away, the soldiers think, well, what am I fighting for? I'm getting out of here. So the entire left flank of the Persian army routs. Meanwhile, the Greeks and Macedonians are in dire straits back here. Alexander wants desperately to go for Darius, who's running away, and follows him until he gets a message from Parmenio, who Leon talked about and who Alexander will kill later, that they need some help over here. Alexander turns around, drives his cavalry wedge into the flank of the remaining Persians on the battlefield, and they flee. That's called the Battle of Gaugamela, and the stakes were the Persian Empire. Darius will be killed by his lieutenants within a few months. There's no question as to who the Persian emperor is now. It's Alexander. Alexander goes on to fight in Afghanistan, in India. He fights some famous battles that I won't talk about. He carves out this entire territory. He basically follows Cyrus, the original Persian king, and he owns all of the territory that the Persians own. He comes back here to Babylon, which he intends to make his capital. He dies there, probably of actually typhoid fever, at the age of 30. He dies in 323. He's 33 years old.
What about Rome?
Rome is a place that nobody cares about at this point, and they're coming next, so I'll talk about them in brief in just a second. Alexander's empire is broken up between his lieutenants. This is 300 BC, much more fractionated when the Romans meet it in 200 BC, 120 years after Alexander dies. But this is a time of the spread of Greek culture. It's called Hellenism. Hellenism spans from 323 BC, the death of Alexander, to 31 BC, the Battle of Actium, which I won't talk about. But that's when Caesar Augustus beats all of his rivals for the Roman head of state. Antikythera mechanism is there's a handout back there near Joe that I made for people. I'm not going to talk about it. It's a marvelous, it is an analog computer used to calculate the position of the stars, planets, constellations, and the moon if you designate a date that you crank in. You enter data with a crank, and it revolves, and it gives you the position of all the constellations, the planets, for whatever date you crank in. It was made in 80 BC, and it was found off of this island called Antikythera, which is across from Kythera. There's a guy named Archimedes who was not just the owl of Merlin. He was a Syracusan mathematician and scientist who was doing complex mathematics and had a series of innovations which stymied the Romans for a number of years. There were great playwrights named Menander. There were others who spread Greek new comedy throughout the Roman world, and all of Roman comedy, as well as Moliere and Shakespeare, drew their plots nearly directly from Menander, not to mention their basic characters and things like that. Now, Rome's origins are obscured in legend. We know about these hills surrounding Rome, surrounding the Tiber River. It started as a community of settlements on these hills. Rome is down here. This is northern Italy. Rome originally started expanding sort of radially. People have heard of, or maybe seen in Florence, the sculpture The Rape of the Sabine Women. That comes from a semi-legendary event in which the Romans, who were sort of a band of rough outlaw guys who had no women, invited the Sabine men to like a party in Rome and killed all the Sabine men and took all the Sabine women for their wives, which is sort of how Rome procreated in this semi-legendary story. Here's the rape of the Sabine women. Where is this, Kristen?
What? It's in the Loge di Lanzi?
Yeah.
In Florence.
She said. It's in Florence. You can go see it yourself. This was sculpted in 1583 by somebody, I can't remember who it was. The Romans had a formation which ended up defeating the Greek phalanx. I won't go into it. It's pretty complicated. But suffice it to say that unlike the block of Greek soldiers, it was more malleable. It was more versatile. It could adjust to situations that the tightly packed phalanx could not. And a phalanx with good training, good equipment on flat ground may have been able to beat a Roman legion, but it could never seem to find that battlefield in those circumstances. So Rome expands. It takes over Etruria, which is where the Etruscans are, I think. Yeah. They expand south. They take over most of Italy. People who were at my last talk know about the Cisalpine Gaul. There were non-Romans. There were people who spoke an Indo-European language that was unlike the Italic languages, who lived up here. Romans are starting to expand up into there. Here's the Mediterranean again. Rome controls Italy, not Sicily, not Corsica or Sardinia. There is right here the city of Carthage, which descended from, as I said before, ancient Phoenicia, modern-day Lebanon. They were the power players in the Western Mediterranean for this entire period of time. And they constantly fought with Rome. I said they fought with Greeks in Sicily 200 years earlier. At this time, Rome owns Italy. Sicily is Greek. Sardinia and Corsica are doing their own thing. And Carthage owns all of supra-Saharan Africa to the west of sort of the middle of the continent, and most of Spain, which is where most of their mines and so forth were. There is a guy named Hannibal whose family came from Barca. That's why he's called Hannibal Barca. And he and his father built a Carthaginian army in Spain. Hannibal decides, after the first Punic War, in which Italy takes Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, Hannibal decides he hates the Romans, and he decides he has to kill them all. So, unfortunately for the Carthaginians, the Romans control all the sea. The Carthaginians have virtually no naval force. So Hannibal is forced to do what everybody thinks is impossible, and go through the Pyrenees, through the Alps, and attack Italy from the north. Google Maps is a wonderful thing. Google Earth, that is. This is dark now that things have been edited or changed. This is the western coast of Italy. This is the boot. This is the calf of the boot. Alps are here, and the coastline of the Mediterranean and France are here. Pyrenees are here, and Spain goes down like this. Hannibal marches to Avignon, escapes a small expeditionary force of Romans who are trying to figure out where it is. He walks to the foothills of the Alps and follows a river basin over a couple of months to the summit of the Alps, the Little St. Bernard Pass, which is right next to the Greater St. Bernard Pass that Napoleon put his troops through, and descended in the winter of 218, well, in the late fall of 218 BC, to the foothills of the Italian Alps. He started with 100 elephants. He got to the foothills of the Italian Alps with about 8. He fought in a battle, didn't do anything, and all died because it was cold. He brought elephants. It was a big psychological warfare coup. It was not a significant tactical coup, because they all died. Hannibal marches his army with impunity in Cisalpine Gaul, where the Gauls are allied to him. He marches down here, and within a year and a half has destroyed the 2 armies that Rome has fielded. They have fielded 80,000 men twice, and he's killed all of them twice by tactics that Romans don't understand. They're Alexandrian tactics, they're Greek tactics. They are subtlety, there's ruse, there is strategy, and all Romans know is attack, boldness. We're Romans, that's what we do. We charge straight in and end up being outflanked and completely destroyed by people who understand the art of war. Hannibal marches into southern Italy, and he lands in 216 BC on the Alphetus River right here. And that is, and you can't see it, but there is a settlement right there called Cannae. And that settlement is where the greatest defeat of the Romans, of the Roman Republic, of the Roman Republic takes place. I am going to stop here. This will be over I'm going to finish in 15 more minutes. This will be over. But we're going to run out of tape. I need to drink some water, and people either can stick around, go to the bathroom, whatever, and we'll finish it up very quickly. A lot. Well, enough.
I mean, by the time
To replenish.
he fought his first battle against the Romans, how many was he up to?
Well, the first battle against the Romans was a little bitty skirmish with a small force.
Well, what about that one, the surprise attack where he pushed them all into the water? What was
That was that battle. He probably had 40,000.
Down to 7.
David, he conscripted a lot of people. He conscripted a lot of, I mean, he went in and yeah, the basic of his group was small, but he conscripted an enormous number.
The Carthaginian army, well, the Roman army, nobody cares about. They were armed much like lightly armed hoplites. The Carthaginian army was similarly, but less well equipped. Just their arms just weren't as good. They weren't as sturdy. But what the Romans had were well-trained soldiers, but that's all. What the Carthaginians had were veterans.
Fantastic leaders.
Well,
They
first
had
of all,
really, really good leaders.
a leader of unparalleled. I think that Alexander is the greatest military leader of all time.
But he has a bunch of guys under him.
Yeah, but I think Alexander is in a rank by himself. I think that Hannibal is in the second rank by himself. And I think there are some people, Napoleon if you want, Caesar if you want, you can argue. But I don't think you can argue with me, but I'm not going to change my mind that I think it's Alexander and Hannibal are the best two, unquestionably. I'm sure Leon would argue, but not at 10 p.m. 10:30. You straggled in late, Matter.
But he brought good wine.
Who shows up at 7:30?
So the Carthaginians the Carthaginians bring to the field 32,000. I'm not following my outline anymore. The Carthaginians bring 32,000 infantry to the field, and 8,000 Spanish and Gallic. Okay, the Carthaginian army is made up of mercenaries who are from all over the Carthaginian Empire. There are Carthaginians, there are Numidians from Africa, there are Africans from Africa, there are Spanish, and there are Celts from northern Italy, and from the French side of the Alps.
Yeah, as they cross the Alps, each town, they would bring in more people.
It's more like they lost more people because they kept.
They lost a lot of their own troops because they all brought in others. So when
at the Italian foothills, they gained a lot of people. Throughout the Alps and the French foothills, those people fought tooth and nail all the way, and
That's great.
caused great loss to the Carthaginian army. The Italian Gauls, who were always being directly attacked and lorded over by Rome, were happy to have Hannibal. All the other Gauls, who were less, in whose faces the Romans were less, didn't care about the Romans and didn't want some guy from Spain walking through their territory. So the Carthaginian army was a hodgepodge of people from all over the Mediterranean world, spoke different languages. The only things that united them were that they were veterans of the Hannibalic Wars and Hannibal's father's wars in Spain, and that Hannibal was an unparalleled leader. The Romans had well-trained, solid soldiers with better equipment, greater numbers, but it wasn't enough against a leader like Hannibal. So the Romans brought 66,000 Roman legionaries to the field. They brought, well, I'll just show you. The Romans bring 66,000 legionaries, infantry, to the field. On their left flank, they put around 5,000 cavalry, and on their right flank, they put around 2,500 cavalry. Hannibal has 32,000 infantry. The Africans on either flank of the Spaniards and Gauls, he holds in reserve. The Spaniards and Gauls he arranges in an arc, a convex arc, towards the Roman infantry line. He places 8,000 Spanish and Gallic cavalry on his left flank, and his crack cavalry force, the Numidians, only 2,000 to hold off 5,000 Romans. Okay? These are the opening positions of the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. Rome has lost its entire army once at the Ticinus River, twice at Lake Trasimene, and they have thrown everything into Cannae. There is a river here, the Alcibiades River, which is fordable. Usually you don't want to have a river in your back because you can't escape through it and you get slaughtered. But it's also good for your troops to know that they can't escape, so they better go forward. 32,000 Carthaginian infantry, 8,000 cavalry, 2,000 cavalry, 66,000 infantry of the Romans, 2,500, what did I say? 5,000. Opening movement, what does Rome always do? Same thing, they attack. They don't understand the art of war. They just understand attack. So they attack. They, oh, goodness.
Dell understands the art of war.
Oh, no.
Just get to the punchline. Which side won?
The Roman infantry barrels into the thin, concave formation of Carthaginian infantry, which starts to bow back a little bit, starts to lose ground. They're completely outmatched as far as weight and numbers. The cavalry on the Carthaginian flanks engage the Roman cavalry. Carthaginian cavalry is superior cavalry in numbers and in quality, unquestionably.
But they don't have the numbers here, though.
Well, they have the numbers here. They do not have the numbers here.
Okay.
But these 2,000 are a good match for these 5,000. Because the Numidian cavalry, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry, is a crack force.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
It did work. That's how I... okay. Well.
Press the... Yeah, there you go.
So the Roman legionaries barrel down the middle of the Carthaginian formation, which backs up a little bit. The Roman right flank, the cavalry on the right flank, immediately is outmatched and flees. The African infantry on the flanks has not engaged yet. It's held in reserve. Meanwhile, the Numidian cavalry on Hannibal's right is skirmishing to a stalemate with 2.5 times their numbers of Roman cavalry on the Roman left flank. Here is the remnants of the Roman right flank fleeing the field. What does the fact that the Roman right flank is gone mean to the infantry that is now the Roman flank? It means they're exposed what do? Their natural inclination is to go towards the center, go away from their flank, and they are encouraged by the seeming victory of their infantry against the center of the Carthaginian army, which is progressively, slowly, but surely sinking back from their convexity into a straight line. Meanwhile, Hannibal's second in command, named Hasdrubal, not Hasdrubal his brother, they only had like 6 names in Carthage. Hasdrubal is in charge of the Spanish and Gallic cavalry, and he completes this maneuver, which is sort of legendary in military history. And it's a named maneuver. It's called Hasdrubal's Circuit. And this is when Hasdrubal takes his cavalry from the left flank of the Carthaginian army, circuits behind the Roman army, and attacks the Roman left flank from behind. If I were in a rock band, I would call it Hasdrubal's Circuit, because I think that's a cool name for a rock band, which is why I'll never be in a rock band. Hasdrubal takes the Spanish and Gallic cavalry to the Roman left flank. Roman left flank routes. There's nothing they can do. So the Numidians follow them off of the field. Meanwhile, the Roman legions are packing 66,000 men who were once in a rectangle into a square, driving into the middle. Our ancient historians tell us that they pack so densely that they cease to be able to wield their weapons effectively. They're all going towards the middle. That's where the Carthaginians are cracking, and they all force themselves in there, aided by the fact that their flanks are weakened, and so they're trying to go where they're winning and get away from where they're not. So they're compressing into the middle. The Carthaginian center is losing. Hannibal's in the center, by the way. Hannibal's always in the center. Alexander is always the first person in line. Alexander always wears a white plume to show who he is, to himself and to the enemy. These great leaders, Alexander and Hannibal, and not people like Caesar necessarily, or like Napoleon necessarily, they go in first.
Or George Bush.
Or George Bush. And your troops know it. Your troops know that you put yourself in no safer position than they are, and they follow you. Hannibal and the Carthaginian center is losing, strategically retreating. We don't really know. But this setup was designed, it seems. Meanwhile, African infantry, heretofore held in reserve, collapses on the Roman flanks. And Hasdrubal, now victorious on the Roman right, circles around to attack the rear of the Roman formation. So now, Hannibal, who knew Herodotus well and knew the tactics at Marathon as well as any man who was alive, we assume, has not only pulled off a double envelopment or a pincer maneuver, but has completely surrounded the Roman forces. And you can imagine what comes next. Out of 66,000 of the Romans, about 7,000 or 8,000 remain. One of them's name is Scipio Africanus, who will learn the lessons of Cannae and of the previous several years. This is the only battle in the 5 in which the victorious side ends up losing, and the loser ends up dominating the world. The reason I include it is because every military historian, every West Point graduate, everyone, this is the classic battle in history. But what is it? But Hannibal marches around Italy. The Romans have learned something. You don't engage Hannibal. You play cat and mouse. 216 to 202 BC, the Romans prod and raid supplies. They fight in Spain and they take away his support network in Spain, but they don't engage, and they learn how to fight wars. They learn the art of war.
But there's another issue going on here. Is that he's been back in Athens, in Greece. He's fighting the politics incredibly.
In Carthage.
In Carthage.
Yeah.
They basically don't support this.
Yeah. The Carthaginians.
So it's an enormous problem for him.
The Carthaginians are a trading nation. For hundreds of years, they're merchants. They want to do their thing. They don't support this militaristic group of people who, basically Hannibal's line has been aristocratic and militaristic, and the rest of the Carthaginian aristocrats and the populace and the economy do not support this. But how can you not support it? How can you not let it happen? But they're not going to actively support it. They're not going to necessarily call him back. But they are not.
They eventually do.
No, they don't. Scipio Africanus invades Africa. Well, they call him back because they need him back, not because they want him to stop.
Exactly. But he doesn't come.
He comes.
Well, eventually, but not right away.
Well,
that's where the problem lies.
Scipio invades in 202, and Hannibal's back in 202, and they fight a battle at Zama in 202. There's no point for Hannibal or any of the Carthaginians to fight in Italy when the homeland's at risk. So no matter the specific details, Rome avoids Hannibal for 14 years after the Battle of Cannae, ends up invading the Carthaginian homeland. Hannibal is called back to defend Carthage, and at Zama, he, with a worn-out, under-equipped force with fewer numbers against a Roman legionary force with superior weapons, numbers, and now tactics, because they know how to fight them. They've learned. They defeat Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202. Hannibal dies an old man. Hannibal goes to Greece and raises armies. He doesn't actually fight, but he trains armies to go fight Rome. He is out to get Rome, and eventually, when he's an old man, Rome has sent assassins for decades to try to find him. They finally find him. They corner him in a house, and Hannibal takes his life and says, and I paraphrase, Roman babies will now be able to sleep better now that Rome has assassinated a defenseless old man. But Hannibal, for literally hundreds of years, was sort of a boogeyman. If you were a kid and you were bad, Hannibal was going to come and get you. Hannibal was permanently ingrained in the psyche of all of Rome, even into the imperial period.
It's an interesting thing that at some, there was this counterattack by Rome on Carthage, which, it's a very interesting, offensive tactic or defensive in a way. Saying, well, he's coming around at us. Let's go for the heartland that seems to be stretched thin, which, another military tactic that's, I don't know if that had been used before, but here, particularly successful.
And what I haven't mentioned is during during the time when Hannibal is rampaging and winning, not just not being engaged, but winning, 218 to 216 BC, Scipio Africanus' father, Scipio, had a force in Spain and destroyed the Carthaginian economic base in Spain, which pissed off the Carthaginians at home and said, listen, we backed you up, but now look at what's going on. So the Romans actually had a two-pronged counteroffensive, one to take out the economic base of Carthage in Spain, and then finally to attack the homeland, because they couldn't face Hannibal in Italy. They were too afraid. They, for tactical reasons, couldn't. But they decided to do it at home, and by that time they had just superior everything to Hannibal. So, yeah.
I just kind of contemporized our discussions in that, I read in the paper here recently that apparently in Iraq, there's been a 3-week kind of a lull in the attacks on the oil refinery and the pipelines going out of and so they apparently for the last 3 weeks or since about the time that al-Zakari was assassinated, that they have been able to get oil out of the country of Iraq. They don't know why, but I think it's very interesting. They think there was a mole inside of the oil ministry of Iraq that was kind of, particularly for black market issues. But where the economic attacks is really what kind of cripples a country, or attacking on the supply lines at the very least. But that's kind of an interesting thing that those very principles were being used some 2,000 years later.
Principles are principles, or princeps. Latin. Those things last.
There was a book that was written that Sherry read, of course, but it's about North Africa and the North African campaign in World War II. And I think the same thesis certainly holds there. What happened was the Germans, of course, had all the sophistication in warfare, all of the adroitness, and the British and the Americans go to North Africa. They're almost totally inept. Their people are slaughtered in enormous quantities, and yet somehow they go ahead and they learn those tactics. They too go ahead and eventually attack supply lines and eventually the homeland. But I think the more important thing is you're sort of downplaying the Romans. I think that's maybe kind of the genius. You go ahead and you say, gee, you folks are really pretty clever. Maybe we ought to pick up on that, and then do. And that's I think perhaps the genius that the Romans display.
And the reason I chose this battle as the only one in which the Romans lose, but they're really the winners, is because they learned those things. And I think this is my final slide. It's the entire Mediterranean and much of Europe, and that is the land that the Romans conquered after they learned how to fight a war.
So the Romans were after?
The Roman Republic defeated Carthage at the Battle of Zama in 202, after they had learned some lessons. The Republic expanded into Greece. It expanded into France, Africa. It expanded into Egypt, and it expanded into the Middle East. And Britain. And it turned into an empire, which continued to expand in one direction or another, more or less, which I won't talk about. But it was able to do that because it learned the art of war. And it learned it from Hannibal.
Why don't they turn the art of turning around? If you look at that slide, why are they so susceptible from being attacked from the flank and from the back? If you have, I'm talking about the legion. If you have 6 feet of fighting space around you, why don't you just turn around and face the other way? What's the problem? It's not like the phalanx where you're locked shield and shield.
it's.
All right. I mean, is that second line
I've never
really
fought
doing
in a
anything?
legion or a phalanx, but it seems to me, intuitively, it seems to me not so easy.
I mean, the engagement is the first line, right? I mean, that second line is just kind of hanging out waiting for their turn. So why don't they just redirect
Well,
I mean, I can see where it'd be a problem in the phalanx, but why is it such a problem in the legion?
Well, you know,
there's a.
I mean, and I don't mean to necessarily Hollywoodize it, but you know, if any of you have seen the Lord of the Ring movies, you know, where particularly the last, the third one, where you know there was the final assault on not Minas Tirith, but on Sauron's, you know, on Mordor, but they're all encircled. Where I think you've got, you know, if you're encircled, you know, there's the issue you can all fight outward, and everyone's collapsing inward. You know, there's a sense of, you know, you've got nowhere to go unless you can, you know, actually, you know, pierce through and you know, provide, you know, because otherwise you're there and you could fight forever till you're tired. You know, there's no supply line, there's nothing. You know, so I think it's the issue of, you know, if someone comes up on your backside, you know, perhaps there's that psychological issue of, you know, your supply lines. You know, I think in today's modern warfare, you know, they know now you've got to maintain those supply lines because you can't feed your troops. If you can't feed the troops, they're going to die. I don't know, man.
Well, that's a long-term thing. I mean, in the short term, you just want to stay alive. So, I mean, if the choice for me was to face forward and die or to turn around and look backward and live, I think I would turn around and try to face the other way. So, I mean, if there's something not holding you physically from turning around, why don't you just turn around?
I think that the evidence of the history of warfare might argue against you. If it were that easy, people would do it, and people wouldn't lose every time they got outflanked. But people do lose every time they get outflanked, at least in this era of infantry as it is. And that must be because that's how it goes, to me.
Does it happen when you get guns and stuff?
I think it's just the issue of being blindsided. You know, you're fighting forward, and you think the attack's ahead of you. And all of a sudden, you're getting shot from behind. Now, when the guys behind you are falling.
He's talking about the flanks. He's just talking about creating
a
concentric circle. You know, why can't you just...
It's like you're talking
But you don't know.
Why don't you arrange yourself in a circle?
Well, people did that, and there were, you know, Croesus at the Battle of Cannae in 53 BC walked into the battle against the what were their names? I can't remember. But his formation was a square, facing outwards every way. But, you know, that's a defensive formation. That's how you try not to lose, not how you win. And maybe you won't lose, but you're not going to win. And the only way you win is by surrounding and destroying.
An octagon, like
and, you know, if they had a dodecahedron,
or you could do it like a World Cup. That would be cool. You know, you don't want to peak days after the overtime's over, you know.
Oh, come on, don't be bitter. The Germans won. Hey, I got a question, Dave. Yeah, I find it amazing how coordinated. I mean, at least when you lay out the diagram, you know, there seems to be an extraordinary amount of coordination of Hannibal's armies, and not just Hannibal's, but eventually Scipio's and whatnot. What's your understanding of how they communicated and how they were so coordinated? I mean, it's almost
a lot of the communication was by sound, trumpets, playing particular series of notes.
Do these drums at all, or just
not? Well, I mean, in the din of a battlefield, it would make sense that the bass would probably carry more. I don't know the details, but people communicated by trumpet, by sound like that, and they communicated by sending messengers.
Sure.
So, for instance, remember when Alexander was trying to follow Darius, but Parmenio really needed his help on the left flank. Maybe people, they used, Parmenio sent a horseman with a message to catch up with them and let them know. These battles, you know, it looks like it happened in 10 seconds.
Sure.
It took 10 hours. so it was, there was time for that sort of communication, but obviously it was not ideal.
But,
Sure, yeah.
But also to contemporize, what he has just said about the communication on the battlefields. We spent